Hello my dear sewing friends, it's Alisa here, and in this video I would love for us to discuss and bust through 9 serger myths and mistakes. Now this comes on the heels of us finishing up 2 full serger series. In one of them we've learned about 5 simple serger techniques, very detailed, very useful with troubleshooting and a lot of examples. And in the other one we talked about 10 simple serger projects that will help you develop your skills. Now if you want to see both of those series, I will link them at the end of the video, so definitely stay tuned. Also, please remember that I do speak from my personal experience, and my one and only motivation is to make sure that you get the best result and that you continue nourishing that creative sewing spark that you have inside of you. But as always, your opinions might differ, you might disagree, and that's totally fine. As always, do what's best for you. Now, the first myth and mistake that I see repeated quite often is that if anything is wrong, then tension is the one to blame. Now, don't get me wrong, tension can definitely be a major culprit. It can make you pull your hair out. I've been there, I totally understand. But there are 3 additional factors that can really influence the formation of those serger stitches, but for some reason, we don't really pay as much significance to those as we do to tension. One of the major factors are your needles. So how fresh are they? Are they bent? Are they blunt? Do they have burrs in them? Are they the right size needles? All of that can contribute to some major problems that can look like it's the fault of tension, but it's actually in the needles. Next is the quality of your thread. If you tug on it and it breaks real easy, your thread is probably bad or old, and sometimes we might experience it snapping as we serge, so we might think that it's tension, but it's actually in the thread. The third factor is the timing, and the timing when we talk about in context of serger refers to how all of the elements, the upper looper, the lower looper, and the needles come together at exactly the right time in order to form that chain of serger stitches. If one of the elements is like half a second late or half a second too early, it might result in not only uneven stitches, but it might not even form a stitch to begin with, which might seem like the tension problem, but once again, it is not. Speaking from my own personal experience, I only had the timing problem once. It was caused by my own doing. We're going to talk about it later. And the only way to resolve it was to bring the serger in for the service, for which I paid $150. A hard lesson to learn. As I mentioned, we'll talk about it a little bit later. Then, of course, 2 other factors that you might want to keep in mind are the general cleanliness and just general upkeep of your serger, oiling and cleaning it, and of course the correct threading, which also sometimes is mistaken for the tension problems. I think in general there's just a lot of conversation about tension and serger, which rightly so, because tension is responsible for a lot of beautiful techniques that we can do with a serger, but I think that's one of the reasons why it seems, and that's why we sort of default to that notion that, oh, if something is wrong, it must be the tension. But I do encourage you to at least check those 2, needles and thread. Next myth that we're going to bust is that serger is only good for finishing edges. And if you've been with me through the 2 series that I've mentioned, then you know where I'm going with this, because oh boy, you can definitely do so much more with a serger than just simply finishing those raw edges of your garment. Even budget-friendly, like very simple models like the one that I have over here, and I've had it for many years now, can do some amazing things. For convenience, it can gather. For some decorative elements, it can do pin tucks. You can also do other decorative stitches. When we're talking about hems, probably at least 5 different types of hems, starting with a rolled hem, then continuing with a lettuce hem, then of course a flat lock hem twice because it's a reversible technique, and many more. Now when you go further and more creative, you'll see that you can create patchwork with your serger, like I did a full blanket. You can also create your own lace elements with a serger, and many more other things. It's just a matter of learning and experimenting. But of course, finishing the raw edges is the most used and common function of a serger, but just because it is doesn't mean that you have to stop there. This next myth is quite interesting because it has 2 sides to it. On one hand, we have a camp of people who thinks that using a serger is subpar because the serger in their mind is an equivalent of fast fashion. And then there's another camp of people who thinks that using a serger is superior than hand sewing or a sewing machine because we've sort of been conditioned to think that the only beautiful and right way to finish the raw edges would be by using a serger. A fun fact here, and that's actually what made me include this in the list of myths about serger, is that people actually commented on my serger series saying that they will not be watching my serger series, and they kind of feel a little disappointed that I'm even doing serger series because it is such a low bar of sewing and that it is a fast fashion way of sewing. I'm of course paraphrasing, but that's the essence of what a lot of people think in this myth category. Now, many years ago when I first started sewing, I used to be in the latter camp of this myth because I did think that the only way that my garments are going to look professional would be if I had a serger to finish those raw edges and the insides. But now I'm in neither. To those who think that using a serger somehow diminishes your sewing knowledge or your sewing experience, or somehow makes you more subpar than those who don't use serger, or that serger is a fast fashion representation, I would say that focus on the fact that it's a tool and look beyond and expand sort of like your knowledge of sewing. It's just a tool. You decide how you're going to work with it, and just because it is used in fast fashion, it doesn't mean that it's the sole representation of that part of sewing and fashion world. Now, to those who think what I thought many years ago, that serger is the only way how to finish those insides really beautifully, and that's sort of like the mark of your professionalism, I would say that is just one technique of many. There are so many ways to go, and your hands, these hands, are capable of so many things. It's just a matter of time, technique, and skill. Serger is a fast machine. There's just no denying that. There's no debating that. And it does make life easier on a lot of different levels, especially when you sew a lot like I do and when you sew a lot with knits. However, in my opinion, just because you have a serger and you finish your edges with a serger or you sew your knits on a serger doesn't make you any more or doesn't make you any less than a person who sews entirely by hand or a combination between a sewing machine and hand sewing. There are times when using a serger would be faster, but you know what? I want a bias tape finished seams, and therefore I go with that. Or sometimes I want to finish them by hand, and I go with that. Once again, serger is just a tool. It's you who decides what to do with it and how to use it. This next one is a really quick one, a really easy myth to bust. And for some reason, I do see this assumption quite a bit in the comments underneath my videos. And that is that people think that sergers are only made for sewing with knits. In reality, just like your sewing machine can handle a lot of different fabrics, your serger can do the same. It is, however, really great for knits, from chunky to thin to medium and everything in between, but it's also just as great for your woven fabrics as well. Anything from cotton to linen to rayon to silk and more. So this definitely isn't just for knits, it's for a lot of different fabrics. Serger mistake number 5 is simply being too scared of this machine and too scared to even try. And I know this is a real fear, I totally get it, and I know it because I see this sentiment repeated over and over again quite a bit in the comments underneath the videos, so I know that a lot of people are dealing with that. But I always want to try to remind you that you are the boss, and the serger is the tool, not the other way around. You are the boss. I find that oftentimes the more you understand the mechanics of how something works, the less fear you have towards that tool. And I also find that the more you practice, the more you actually have hands-on experience, the less fear you're going to have moving on onto the actual project. So those are definitely the 2 things that I would recommend. Number 1, getting to know your serger, and number 2, grabbing that pile of fabric scraps and getting to practice. So that way you build up a little bit of that confidence before you move onto your actual project. And I know that a lot of you did say that you have a brand new serger sitting in the box in the corner of your sewing space. So I want to take that moment to encourage you to take it out and give it a try, because at the end of the day, what is there to lose, right? Nothing. But do make sure that you dedicate like an hour or two or any free time that you have, so that way you don't feel rushed, you don't feel pressured, and then you can really explore everything that it can do. Let's talk about serger myth number 6, that serger can entirely replace a sewing machine. Now, oftentimes I actually see it phrased as a question. Can serger replace a sewing machine and be used instead? The answer to this is definitely multifaceted, and it all depends on what you need and what kind of functions you're going to be using the most. And while you can use serger in order to construct an entire garment, in fact, we've just done it in one of the previous serger series episodes, I would say that in most of the cases, it cannot replace a sewing machine. It can be as a great addition, as an additional tool, but it cannot fully replace a sewing machine. Now, here's a fun story and also a really hard lesson that I had to learn. So years ago, I did a very similar video about busting some myths about serger. And in one of the points, I said something along the lines that while serger can do a lot of different things, there are certain things that can only a sewing machine do, like for example, successfully installing a zipper. And I had a whole bunch of people in the comments say that it's actually not true. You can install a zipper on a serger. And while I do agree that technically, you can take a zipper and a piece of fabric, place them right sides together, and then serge it, I wouldn't necessarily call it a successful installation of a zipper, because you can also use a spoon to carve out a statue, but it's not necessarily efficient or successful. And actually, one of the reasons that I do not recommend installing zippers or trying to install zippers on a serger is because that's how I got my timing out of whack, and that's what made me take in my serger and pay the $150 in order to get that timing fixed. It was definitely my fault, no question there. It also happened many years ago, so it's kind of hard to analyze now what exactly went wrong. But when I tried to look back at it and think about it, I'm assuming that when I decided to go over many harder parts of a nylon zipper plus the layers of fabric, that's when the timing got set off. And I also broke a needle in the process, so there's that. And while technically, yes, I agree, you can install a zipper on a serger, knowing what happened to me, I would say please do avoid that. If you have a sewing machine, please use a sewing machine to install a zipper. So that's my personal opinion. I still stand by it. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, you might be of a different opinion, and that's totally fine. You have to do what's right for you. Myth number 7 is that if you sew your knits only with a 4-thread serger technique, then they're going to fall apart right away. Definitely very not true. In fact, I would say that I've made over 100, maybe even more than that, knit garments that were entirely made with a 4-thread serger technique. In fact, I would say about 90 to 95% of clothes that I make for my daughter over the last 7 years since birth till now were made out of knits, because that's what she likes to wear. And most of them were made entirely on a serger, and we never had any problems. And I also make clothes on the serger for myself and for my husband. So if you are experiencing a problem where you are sewing with knits and you're using a serger, and for some reason after you serge the seam it just falls apart, I would take a look at 2 things. Number 1, your tension, and number 2, the quality of your thread. But other than that, you shouldn't really be having any problems. In fact, if you are watching this video and you're sitting in a store-bought t-shirt or sweatshirt or any other garment, take a look on the insides. Chances are the seam, if it's a knit garment, is constructed by using a 4-thread serger technique. And if that doesn't fall apart, then neither should your own seam as well. So definitely problem solve it and know that it's definitely a myth. Myth number 8 is that sergers are really expensive to maintain. Now, my serger is a budget-friendly model, very, very basic, so I can't speak to those sergers that cost thousands and thousands of dollars. I had my serger for probably a decade, maybe even longer, and the only really big expense was that time when I serged that zipper, and it did cost me $150 to repair it. Other than that, the other two expenses are your thread cones and of course your needles. The needles are the same expense that you would have on a sewing machine. The only difference, of course, here we have 2 needles, and on a sewing machine usually you would work with 1 needle. So that does get a little bit more expensive over time, but I would say the real cost is in the thread cones, but only if you're trying to do 4 of the same color for every single project. Then yes, it can get real expensive, especially if you're working with a wide range of colors and you want all of the thread cones to match every single time. I, however, stick to the rule of thumb that the closest color should always go to the needle that's the closest to the project, so the one that's going to be seen if you really stretch your seam. Everything else can be a shade of that color and they don't have to match, like in this example. This not only saves the money but also the space, because having 4 thread cones of the same color can really accumulate quite fast and then might feel really overwhelming because you have to store it somehow. Other than that, I can't really say that I had any sort of crazy expenses when it comes to maintaining and operating my serger, so I would definitely say that it's quite a myth. But once again, I have a budget, basic level serger. I can't really speak to those that are really high-end models. And mistake number 9, and I did save the best for last, so to say, and I know that this is going to sound simple, stupid, but please bear with me. Mistake number 9, which I see repeat itself over and over again, is not using your serger manual. I see so many questions underneath my serger videos that can be simply answered just by looking and consulting with your serger manual. Now, if you have misplaced yours, that's totally fine. Nowadays, you can actually find a lot of these for free online from most of the manufacturers, which makes it easy, very convenient. And the reason why I included this in this list as probably one of the biggest mistakes is because I promise you, all of the techniques that we discussed in a Simple Serger Techniques series, I did not invent them. I did not create them. In fact, they all came from a serger manual. All I did was just try, get the practice, problem solve, and then try again, and then try to understand the techniques and ins and outs. Of course, I did search for some additional information, but most of it did come from a serger manual. So I'm saying this because if I can do it, then you can do it as well. Now, if you do want to practice your skills with Simple Serger projects, then click right over here, and as promised, 5 simple serger techniques will be right over here, 2 entire series. I truly hope that you did enjoy this video, and until next time, happy sewing and happy serging. Bye!